This is Addison Heimann, the writer-director of Hypochondriac, and you are listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to The Graveyard.
And welcome to another edition of the Graveyard Show podcast. I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Well, we're going to talk about the new film, Hypochondriac. As director and writer of the film, Addison Heimann will be here in just a moment to talk about Hypochondriac, which will be in theaters on July 29th, and it's going to be available on demand and digital starting August 4th. Now, if you'd like to reach out to this show, you can do so by email. And the email address is gyspodcast@gmail.com. gyspodcast@gmail.com. And of course, you can also reach out to me as well on the Graveyard Show Podcast YouTube channel. Just drop a comment on there. It hits me, and I reply. I reply pretty quickly, too. So you can do that as well. Getting a lot of great comments from people on the Count Yorga video, which is always appreciated. But I can get into that a little bit later. So before we get into Hypochondriac, let's look at the news. Well, I'm going to start with two big news items over the last week. So people said yep to nope. See what I did there? I'll say it again so you can appreciate it. People said yep to nope. Just going to let that linger there for a minute. It took me all week to figure that one out, huh? Yeah, I'm very proud of myself. Jordan Peele's latest feature film grossed almost $44.5 million in its opening weekend, making it the #1 movie, with Thor: Love and Thunder coming in second, and that film grossed about half of that. So big weekend for Nope. As of this taping, Nope also scored 82% on Rotten Tomatoes. So that's with 250 movie reviewers giving their commentary on Nope. So that's great score. It also has 71% on the audience score, and that's with 2,500 audience members reviewing the film on there as well. So it's a really consistent rating, considering how many movies lately have had lopsided scores one way or the other. They're really either critics love them and audiences hate them, or critics hate it and audiences love it. So I think that's a great sign for Jordan Peele's latest film. Now, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm really looking forward to catching it in the theater at some point soon. And, Top Gun Maverick finished 5th with just over $10 million in its 8th week. Absolutely incredible. The other big news is the release of Halloween Ends teaser trailer, which came out. I'm sure most of you have already seen it. So it's a lot going on in 60 seconds of a teaser. So one of the things I caught, I'm sure there are many of you who have either done a full breakdown of this or have watched one. One of the interesting things is that it looks like Laurie is wearing the same style blue shirt as she wore in the original Halloween. So kind of tying it up. Halloween Ends. Is it really, though? I mean, let's be honest about this. If this movie makes huge cash, what are the odds that we're going to see a sequel after this with the surviving members of this film? I say surviving members because I have a feeling, I think I know what might be happening, but I don't want to give it away or talk about it because I could very well be wrong, and I'd rather not put it out there. But I think that if Halloween Ends makes a huge cash in its theatrical release, there's no way that Halloween is just going to stop. Personally, I wish it would. I think it's run its course. The Strode / Lloyd / Myers family saga, I think, has done everything it's needed to do. So I do hope that Halloween does end here. Now, I know that it's really not going to end, but let's give it some breathing room and some space. And, if you're going to reboot it or restart it, let's do it in like 10 years, please. let's just, we've got a lot. I think, what do we have, like 13 movies since 1978? And that was with, a pretty big lull between Halloween 3 and 4. And, including the 2 Rob Zombie remakes in there as well. So I think we have about 13, right? So we have Halloween, Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Halloween 4, Halloween 5, Halloween 6. Then we went to H2O, right? Then we did Resurrection. So that's 8 right there. And then we have the 2 Rob Zombie remakes that came out after that. That's 10. And then this last trilogy. So, so we're looking at about 13 films since 1978. So 22 and 22, 44 years. There you go. But check it out. Love to know your thoughts. Are you excited? Are you thrilled? Or is it just kind of a yawn for you at this point? Would love to know your thoughts. gyspodcast@gmail.com. In other movie news, The Immaculate Room is going to be available in theaters and on demand starting August 19th. The film stars Emile Hirsch and Kate Bosworth. They're a seemingly perfect couple. They join a psychological experiment to compete for $5 million if they can last 50 days in a sleek white room in complete isolation. That sounds utterly frightening. I wouldn't do that for $100 million. No phones, no family. Oh my, that would take a lot of you out. No phones. I think most of you would disintegrate without your phone. Only the voice of the Immaculate Room, keeping them in check if they think of straying. But as the clock ticks down, the room becomes more than it seems, putting them through cruel tests to break their resolve and resurfacing private demons which they may not survive. Again, The Immaculate Room is available in theaters and on demand starting August 19th. That sounds great. And I believe the trailer is available online as well. In more movie news, I have 2 movies to talk to you about from Shudder. Shudder presents The Reef Stalked. It's an RLJE Films release. You can catch the trailer right now online. And also, RLJE Films and Shudder have acquired Neil Marshall's new film, The Lair. Following its world premiere at Fright Fest in August, RLJE Films will release The Lair in theaters, on demand, and digital starting October 28th. Shudder will have it in early 2023. Now, the film is written and directed by Neil Marshall, of course, we know from The Descent, among other films, and it is co-written by Charlotte Kirk. Now, the film stars Charlotte Kirk, Jonathan Howard, and Jamie Bamber. In The Lair, Royal Air Force pilot Lieutenant Kate Sinclair, played by Kirk, is shot down over Afghanistan and finds refuge in an abandoned underground bunker where deadly man-made biological weapons, half human, half alien, are awakened. That sounds great. Can't wait for that to come out. So again, The Lair, the new film from Neil Marshall, will be available in theaters and on demand and on digital October 28th, of course, right in time for Halloween. And then, of course, if you have Shudder, you will be getting that early 2023. Fathom Events is going to present a special 3-night engagement of Jeepers Creepers Reborn. The fan premiere event is going to run in theaters starting September 19th through the 21st. Now, Timo Vornsola's highly anticipated Jeepers Creepers Reborn will come to audiences via a 3-night fan premiere event offered exclusively through Fathom Events nationwide. Jeepers Creepers Reborn unfolds as the Horror Hound Festival holds its first ever event in Louisiana, where it attracts hundreds of geeks, freaks, and die-hard horror fans from far and wide. Among them is fanboy Chase and his girlfriend Lane, who is visiting a festival of this type for the very first time. But as the event approaches, Lane begins to experience unexplained premonitions and disturbing visions associated with the town's past, and in particular, local legend, urban myth, the Creeper. As the festival arrives and the blood-soaked entertainment builds to a frenzy, Lane believes that something unearthly has been summoned and that she is at the center of it all. Tickets for Jeepers Creepers Reborn can be purchased beginning Friday, August 6th at fathomevents.com. That's Fathom, Fathom, events, events.com, or participating theater box offices. You can find a complete list of theater locations on Fathom Events website, and that's where you go. Check it out. Jeepers Creepers Reborn, coming to a theater near you. Some quick Blu-ray news. The Amusement Park. George Romero's restored film, The Amusement Park, is going to be released on Blu-ray September 13th. It's going to be a new 4K digital restoration that was commissioned by the George A. Romero Foundation and carried out by Indie Collect. You can catch my interview with George Romero's widow, Suzanne Desrochers Romero, right here in the Graveyard Show podcast. Go back a few tombstones and you'll find it right there. It was a great interview, and it was my honor to have her on the program. So check it out. The Amusement Park coming to Blu-ray September 13th. And wrapping up the news, there is a flash sale going on right now for the 1980s super sci-fi documentary In Search of Tomorrow. The flash sale is running from July 21st through August 7th. And to find out more, go to 80scifidoc.com. That's 80scifidoc.com. And of course, you can find all the interviews I did with the director of that film, David Weiner, and the producer, Robin Block, as well as the team of Weary Pines, the composers of the soundtrack as well, Jamie Chambers and Don McLennan Jr., all available here at the Graveyard. All right, that wraps up news. Let's do some quick notes. Speaking of Weary Pines, check out their website, wearypines.com, wearypines.com. And you can purchase their complete soundtracks to not only In Search of Tomorrow, but In Search of Darkness 1 and 2, and they're currently working on Part 3. You can find all their work there. You can buy the discs, you can buy the MP3s, and you can also stream them on your favorite movie sites as well. And wrapping up notes, I normally don't talk about this, but I was watching one of the films from Alex Magana, and Alex is a filmmaker here in LA, and he does horror shorts. And he was on the program about, almost 2 years ago now. No, a little over a year ago. And he does great short films, and one of his latest really caught my attention. And the name of it is called Only Fans. And it's what you expect. It's a horror film about a woman who goes on to OnlyFans to make money because she's drowning in debt. And what is so great about this film is that it's really more about reality than it is horror. I highly recommend it. Check it out. Alex Magana is found online at ACM, and you can find him on YouTube. His films are great, but check out OnlyFans. It is just really powerful and chilling. And unfortunately, it's a very sad state of where we're at right now in our society. All right, enough about that. As you hear in the background, a new grave is being added. And when that happens, that means my guest is here, and it's time for me to get to work. Joining me now is Addison Heimann, the writer-director of the new film Hypochondriac, which made its debut at this year's South by Southwest. The film will be in theaters July 29th and on demand and digital starting August 4th. And it's my pleasure to welcome Addison to the Graveyard. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, the Caretaker. Honestly, this is I really wish I wanted to make I know this is a podcast, but if you can just imagine me breaking through and a bunch of confetti and balloons popping in as I make my way into the room. Maybe some finger gun, pa-choo, pa-choo, blah, blah, that kind of atmosphere.
I love it.
No, I'm just feeling
that's great. I love it. You know what? I'm going to have to keep that in mind for another time.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I've been looking forward to speaking with you about your film since seeing it. But before I jump into the film, I wanted to ask when you first realized that you wanted to become a filmmaker.
Ooh, that's a good question. It's so funny because there's not one moment for me. I will say my interest in film peaked when I was a child because me and my father bonded over television, especially genre television. So at night I would go into the TV room, he'd be watching the X-Files and Star Trek Voyager. And then so that was my interest in all that kind of stuff. And then I started in theater. So I did all that. And then people told me that my plays sounded like TV shows, which is a huge insult in the theater world. I love them. They're still my friends. But also I was well, maybe I should transition. And this is such a weird thing to why, I don't know why this is my interest of it, but I was watching the Ryan Murphy show Scream Queens.
Oh, yeah.
And I was also binge watching Gilmore Girls for the first time in a deep, dark depression. And then I decided to go, I'm going to try writing a pilot. And then that was kind of how I got my way into filmmaking. Writing at the Starbucks under Second City at like 3-4 in the morning because I was in deep, dark insomnia. But that's where I wrote this really goofy pilot called Kappa Force, which is about sorority crime fighters trying to destroy evil frat scum, which is obviously so different than Hypo. But we turned that into a web series, and that was my first filmmaking thing as a writer-producer. So yeah.
That's awesome.
That's
I love that.
Story.
By the way, big fan of Scream Queens. That was my wife and I made sure never to miss that when it came on. That was a fun show.
I mean, I'm so happy that Glenn Powell, like, not that he like needs my like being proud of him, but like him, like Chad Radwell was like my favorite character from Scream Queens. He thought he was so funny, and that's what I modeled one of the characters off in my show. He was the villain. His name was the douche. I mean, pretty obvious, you know, like that type of thing. But I love that show so much, and I was so excited to see something set in college because, you know, normally in America we're so obsessed with high school.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, were there any filmmakers or writers that influenced you?
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, even for this, you know, Ryan Murphy, obviously, every writer on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like, you know, in terms of like filmmakers, like I love Jennifer Kent, I love The Babadook, and obviously, let's call out the rabbit in the corner, like Richard Kelly and Donnie Darko is obviously a big inspiration for me. That's not good. Yeah, I mean, I mean, like, you know, John Carpenter, both Cronenberg's father and son. Weirdly enough, more the son, because Possessor was such a huge inspo for Hypo, and also I love that movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, so much so. But yeah, there's, you know, Claire Denis. Maybe I'm one of the few people that really loved High Life, but like I just think that movie is so strange with the sex box that I was like, oh man, this is great. So I can go on and on, but yeah, I mean, definitely, like, you know, also Greg Araki in terms of queer filmmakers, you know, like The Doom Generation and Mysterious Skin, you know, also Now Apocalypse, which no one watched, but I did. I was obsessed with, like, you know. But yeah,
you know, it's funny with Donnie Darko. I was dating someone at the time, and she's like, "Oh, we have to watch this movie, Donnie Darko. It's so great." And I was at home, and I was like, "All right." And it was like on a Saturday, like late afternoon or something, and I was like, "Oh my God, this movie is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. I love that film. It is."
And it's so. Yeah, I mean, I do too, and like, I mean, my big, and the reason I think I used it for like a cipher for Hypo was because, like, you know, you're at the beginning of Bud Gyllenhaal's asking how one sucks a fuck, and then you like have that like Patrick Swayze being the terrible self-help guru, and that teacher who does not know how to teach, but then in Sparkle Motion, and then you also have like Donnie sitting on the bed next to his mother crying, and he's like, how does it feel to have a wacko for a son? And she says, it feels wonderful. Yeah. And that's in the same movie. And I just learned, I mean, maybe this is like showing my age because I'm 32. So like I watched Donnie kind of in high school, which is when it first came out. But like I didn't realize that movie, because obviously it became a cult hit, but I didn't realize that movie not tanked, but suffered because of 9/11, because of all the plane stuff.
Yeah.
Like seeing it, like, I've never viewed that. Like, you know, it's and like it's interesting when you watch movies like the Blair Witch Project. I love. It's one of my favorite horror movies, and yet I was so independent of the like all that world of it becoming like, is it real or not real, like hiding the actors, trying to make it, because like I think that movie stands on its own regardless of that mystery, but having that kind of behind it too is so fascinating, you know, to go through those little moments of touchstones of film history in which you know, films are because of their time, you know?
It's funny because I remember, I've just flashed back right now. I remember where I was in '99 when I was reading a little bit about Blair Witch, and again, this is before, like, you know, internet was huge, right? And you know, you had all these influences with social media and stuff, and it was like this film, it's like it went back to like that sort of '70s cannibal movie, sort of like, is it real, is it not, you know, where's the cast, are they really missing? And it had this hype that was building to it, and it was like, wow, I can't wait to see this movie. And the same thing with Donnie Darko. You know, I remember, you know, Donnie Darko was in and out of theaters in like a blip. So when I saw it, I think it was like early 2002, probably, when it was on cable. And I'm showing my age now by calling it cable, but there you go. But why don't we start talking? Yeah, I know, but I feel like if I'm not saying streamer, I'm dating myself.
Right.
You know?
Right. It's like I have AMC Plus, so I have access to the AMC streaming, like live stream, but I mainly just use that to watch, all the
Sure.
horror, all the stuff. But anyway, let's continue.
So why don't we speaking of horror, why don't we talk about your film Hypochondriac? Why don't you tell everybody out there what your film is about?
Sure. So Hypochondriac is a gay horror movie based off my mental breakdown. At the beginning, it's just based on a real breakdown. Some people get confused sometimes. I just want people to, it's mine. Trust me, it's mine. I'm not taking somebody else's breakdown and telling their story. But anyway, it tells a story of a young potter, ceramicist, Will, who's has a pretty good job, and he loves his boyfriend, and his boss is kind of annoying, but like it's fine. But when he was 12, his mother, in a fit of psychosis, tried to kill him, and she was since hospitalized. And all of a sudden, 18 years later, she comes out of the woodwork, leaving voicemails telling him not to trust his boyfriend. And while that's happening, he suffers an injury at work that causes these unexplainable symptoms. And then eventually he starts hallucinating a man in a wolf costume. And so he goes down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what the hell is going on. But by doing so, he's pushing everybody away because he doesn't want anybody to know. And that confluence of events causes him to crack. And we watch him go through this and hopefully get through to the other side. But no spoilers.
Yeah. So I didn't realize that this was actually based on something that came from your experience, so I don't want to pry. So,
oh no, trust me, everybody pries. The first question. It's funny that you didn't even ask it first because they're like, "What happened?" And so I'm happy to.
Sure.
Oh yeah. So basically, I lost full functioning of my arms for 6 months after an injury at work, and Dr. Google told me I was dying of ALS, and my mother, who was bipolar, was leaving me voicemails telling me not to trust my friends. So that, and when I mean I lost function of my arms, I couldn't lift my phone, I couldn't shave, I couldn't eat food with a fork. It was like pretty painful. So that confluence of events caused me to crack. And that's ultimately what the movie is based on. More of an emotional retelling than an actual retelling, because I wrote the first draft as therapy, and everyone was like, Addison, this sucks. And I was like, but it happened. And they're like, well, just because it happened doesn't mean it's interesting. And I was like, that means you hate me. And they're like, no, just do better, Addison. And I was like, okay. And then ultimately decided on more of an emotional retelling. Also, like, the first draft had like a cult in it. Like the wolf costume was a friend that died. There was also like a huge indictment on the medical community, like way more than is there now. And also, I think he gets hit by a car and dies at the end. Like, I was truly just grasping at straws. Ultimately, finally settled on, the story of the hidden trauma of my mother, and also how my body basically manifested this disease, or just like this symptoms of a disease that I, of course, did not have, and my obsession into trying to figure out if I'm dying or not, when I was trying to avoid basically talking about my mother.
Gotcha. So, wow, that's really interesting. So, I mean, when you're talking about reality and trying to make that into a script, and you said, the first draft, people are like, yeah, no. Can you talk?
There were bits and pieces. People were like, yes, but also people were like, this is, yeah. I mean, the real story was a production assistant, and I was a production assistant in the movie. And Lord knows I don't want to make a movie about a person who's working in the movies, so I changed it to Joe Potter. Yeah.
I mean, because you always hear about it, right? People are like, oh, I have this great story. I know this thing that happened to me, and you always hear about it when people talk about wanting to write, or whether it's a book or a screenplay or make a movie or whatever. Right. Can you talk to us about like how you take something that's real and then how do you transform that so it can fit into a narrative like film?
Totally. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. It took a while, and I'm so glad that I have that skill now. But it really, I mean, I was sensitive about it because it happened to me. So like, I would take notes personally in a way that was like not healthy, because I was also like writing it in the middle of my breakdown at first, and so like that was like also something that I needed. But it was hard for me to take notes, and it wasn't until much later that I was finally able to separate myself. It's like me, it's like me like right now when you're like, oh, I don't want to cry, and I'm like, trust me, I've said a lot of, I've like really talked about this a lot, because you get a certain amount of separation when you talk about it again and again and again and again, which is honestly like a literal therapy technique, because it's called exposure therapy. I have OCD, and the more I expose myself less powerful they become, as it were. So, I mean, that's ultimately what it was. But like, it took a good 6 months before I sat down with a friend of mine, and I remember her being like, "This is the crux of your movie is your mother, and you're avoiding writing about it and putting all these other things because you are avoiding it, and you need to attack it head on." And I was like, fine. And once I did that, and then also combined all of my friends into a boyfriend character, Luke, who was the last there, it kind of started coming to a more cohesive whole. And once I kind of unlocked the idea of like removing the reality of the situation and trying to tell a more emotional retelling of what happened, trying to recreate on film and in the script what it felt like to have a mental breakdown, that was more of an interesting I think, than the actual story. Because ultimately it's like, regardless of what happens in the movie, like, I'm not interested in telling people what really happened, because it's all from Will's perspective, from my perspective. So who knows if my mother and father were really like that, but that's how I perceived them during my psychosis. And that, I think, is an interesting thing, because there's no villain, I think, in the movie. He's at war with his brain. And that to me is scarier, because and even, in the movie, injures himself because of a hallucination. And it's like that danger that I think is terrifying, not being like an outside demon haunting him, but his literal brain trying to kill him.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the hardest part for me, well, I mean, there were a few watching the film, but you're watching Will trying to get help, and he's going to doctors, and he's telling his boyfriend Luke he's not well. He's telling his boss he's not well, and all of a sudden the boss is like, "You'll be okay," and you're kind of getting the doctor's like, "Here's some pills, you'll be okay." Can you talk about the frustration of what it's like reaching out and going, "I need help," and then having people just kind of be like, "Oh, you'll be okay"?
Yeah, it was. I think the one thing that I've taken away from this experience is like the psychiatry and psychology and medical professionals don't speak to each other. So like, to be told that it's like, you'd be shocked how the mind can affect the body, I'm like, cool. They're like, go to therapy, and I'm like, well, I am in therapy and I'm still feeling these things. So can we just like move past this and try to see if there's like a combination that we can find in which it's both physical and mental? Because I literally had an injury to my arms, but everything else, they were like, it wasn't until 6 months in, because this is the thing. I mean, I get it, because I'm not the only hypochondriac out there, but like, it's very difficult to see a neurologist, and it wasn't until this had been happening for 6 months that my symptoms were consistent with multiple sclerosis, that a neurologist finally saw me and gave me an MRI and muscular and neuromuscular tests in order to rule out all these diseases, because it's like 1 in 10,000 people suffering from that. But my friend's brother had just died of ALS, so I was like really, in the thick of it, especially with my mental health. But yeah, it was frustrating, because I would, that bro doctor, played by Michael Cassidy, is like based off a real doctor that I saw. And I live in LA, so, I walk into an urgent care, and all of a sudden this like model hot dude just comes in, and he's like, "Hey bro, let's see what's going on." And I'm just like, okay, your biceps are just too big for me to take you seriously. I just don't know what to do. And then I would see the next doctor, and then they're like, "Oh, we don't take your insurance." But I'm like panicking. I'm like, "I just need to see a doctor." And she's like, "Okay, well, it's going to be $300, $400. And if there's tests, it's going to be even more, but he's the nicest guy." And then the guy's like, "Yeah, I mean, it's probably in your head, but you might have a sinus infection, so here are steroids." So it's just like that just kept happening to me. And I was like, cool. And then I was told I had a muscle injury. I was told it was tendonitis. Like, I mean, I think ultimately it was a repetitive strain injury, but, when I was told it was a muscle injury, I then went to like, and this is a dumb thing, I started looking holistically, which is something we cut from the script as well. But, that was at the point where this holistic massage therapist injured me to the point where I lost full functioning of my arms. And I was also seeing like, acupuncturist, like I was throwing everything at the wall, but fortunately a really good psychiatrist was kind of guiding me through it, pulling me out of this kind of world of hypochondria and OCD. But it took a while, because it just takes time, and I've learned a lot now.
Yeah.
Never Google your symptoms. Just don't do it.
I was gonna say,
don't do it.
Yeah, I think we've all been there at some point, right? I got a headache, my eyes are tearing, and I'm sneezing. Oh my God, I have Ebola. No, you don't. No, you're okay. I mean, like, literally,
I know it's in this. I know it's in the news now, but like, I was like, I'm very susceptible to bug bites, and I woke up to a bunch of them this morning, and I was like, oh my God, I have monkeypox, and I was like, Addison, come on, you don't have monkeypox. Like, I know that it's, but I'm like, like if that happens, sure, but it's just bug bites. Like, you get bug bites all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just something that I live with.
Well, it's kind of hard too after these last couple of years, right? It's like pandemic, masking, vaccinations, boosters, stay away from people, live in a bubble, and then it's like, okay, we're coming out of it. Oh wait, no, hold on, there's this other one coming in now. It's just like, I told somebody the other day, I go, I can only deal with one pandemic at a time. So right now, I'm just going to deal with COVID, and everything else is going to be. I don't care if Ebola broke out here, smallpox. I'll deal with that later. It's like, my goodness. I mean, it's crazy. One of the things that I really was impressed with is the on-screen relationship portrayal of our Will and Luke's relationship. It felt incredibly real. It didn't feel like a movie relationship. It felt like Luke was doing everything he could to understand and help Will. But also there were moments of frustration and helplessness because, it appears like he doesn't know how to, or maybe, so I was curious, in terms of a real world thing, if someone has a friend or a family member who's dealing with mental illness, what could you tell them to do that can help that individual, help for them process it and be able to help their friend get through whatever it is that they're dealing with?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so again, the disclaimer I always give is I'm not a therapist, but I obviously have dealt with in both the caretaker, and I've also been the person who's taken care of. So I it's hard. It's difficult because there's two sides of the mental health coin, right? It's the people who want help and the people who don't want help. And I think my issue, and I think ultimately what Will and Luke's issue was that Luke was trying to help, but in a way that made Will feel like a burden. So that was kind of the ultimate issue with that, because Will wasn't at a point to accept it, and that kind of budding of conflict is ultimately, I think, what causes them to separate themselves at a certain point in the movie. But I mean, it depends, because if somebody's really depressed, honestly, the best thing that I found is just going over to their house and cleaning up the room for them, even if they don't have certain things like that. It's just the whole thing. That was the thing too. Whenever I was when people were let me know if I can do anything, I'm but that means you put the onus on me, and I have to again be the burden, be can you get me salt so I can put it in the bath to cure my aching muscles, versus somebody being hey, I'm coming over tomorrow, we're gonna hang out, and then the other person could be no, I don't want that, and then there you go, you put up the boundary. But I think more often than not, if somebody was just especially during my darkest days, was hey, I'm coming over, we're hanging out right now, and I'll be okay, yeah, and then they can come over and see what happens, but being that person, if I'm just thinking of how I would want to be helped, it's that, because the less that I have to do when I'm in that kind of state of panic or OCD or depression is to do more work. And it was always very helpful when my friends were I'm coming over, we're hanging out, then that I was able to just be great, the onus isn't on me anymore, because the more it's on me, the worse I feel, if that makes sense.
It does. It really does. What's interesting is that this is your movie is the third movie that I featured this year on the program that has the topic of mental illness in it, and it would actually be the fourth if I go back to November of last year. It's very interesting because I'm noticing that more and more movies are coming out that are looking at mental health, and I'm wondering if what your thoughts are as to why that is.
I think genre has the most beautiful capacity to explore shit without it being kind of really over the top, or beating you over the head for it, because it's almost a sideways in, which I think is really cool. And I think we're, as millennials and Gen Z, as we grow up, we are realizing that I think a lot of things could have solved when we were kids, to realize that we were anxious or depressed or all these other things, because we're just able to talk about it more. So I think as we age, we just we're what do we want to talk about? What were we fucked up with as kids? What do we wish, that's I wanted to make this movie hoping that one, I just wanted to tell my story, but I'm really grateful that I share this movie and people come up to me afterwards and they're just like, hey, thank you. This is like a really honest portrayal and this helped me. And I need people to know that this movie ends with hope, because obviously I'm still here. So it's based on a real breakdown. I'm still here, because there is the power of like getting through it. But I think I think we're finally opening up about it, because I think there's only so much trauma you can take before you're like, okay, we need to talk about this. Because I think my biggest issue was suffering in silence. It's like I just didn't want to be a burden, but the moment I stopped suffering in silence was the moment that people started helping. And if like that could be, and that's all I want to tell. That's all the stories I want to tell. I want to tell genre stories that are queer and deal with mental health, because that's just what I've dealt with, and that's the kind of stuff that I wish I had as a kid or a teenager or a college student growing up. And so that's what I want to make. And I feel like people are also having similar vibes because of that, or like the vibes. I feel like people are wanting that, and there's room for that, and also other filmmakers like me feel like that's an important topic now.
Well, I think it's important too. Filmmakers such as yourself do discuss topics like this and present topics like this, because it's like anything, right? The more you talk about it, the more you present it, the more people can understand it and say, oh, okay, I've never dealt with this, but I can see what it's like from a movie perspective if something like this were to happen to me or a friend or a family member. It just helps get that in their mind that if something like this were to happen, then they can they have some sort of basis just to start with, and then you can start getting into the serious stuff from there. I want to get into the actual filmmaking. I know I'm kind of running out of time here, but as a director, you're not afraid to use the frame, and you let the action happen in these lingering shots. And I was curious, at what point did you decide you wanted to make that part of your directing technique? Yeah,
so like I was obviously like a lot of my cinematography, was a direct and utter collaboration between me and my cinematographer. Oh my God, Dustin Supanchak, who's just incredible. And if anybody's listening, yes, hire him. He's the best. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we came up with this vocabulary of I just love static shots. I think there's something that makes it, and especially when dealing with a movie that it will eventually lift you so high up the ground and you'll feel very disoriented. Starting in static is such a I think phenomenal way to ground something, and only moving the camera when things start to devolve into chaos. And so we wanted to start like as much in static, and then we also created this like vocabulary of what we will do to create this kind of idea of psychosis. So there's this video game called Eternal Darkness on Nintendo GameCube that has this insanity meter. And every time the person gets damaged, the insanity meter goes a little bit up. And so we always had 2 insanity meters going on at all time. This is what I want the audience to believe is real and not real, and what's actually real and not real. So with that, we were able to combine certain techniques. We would paint Vaseline on the lens, and we would have this thing called the lens baby that blurs the reactions, that blurs something from behind. We were working with cow anamorphics that have this great, especially when you use the certain lens like the 40, they create this like weird bubble, like kind of rounding effect that really makes things very funky. And so we had all these tools in principal photography, as well as everybody else was also filled in on. We always were using the insanity meter, so like that's how everybody was kind of on the same page. Just like we would talk about each scene and what it means and how we want it to be portrayed. And then in post we continued with that, and then started using like the crossfades, the doubling, the mirroring kind of representing the Jekyll and Hyde nature of the psychosis of the person who is lucid and the person who is essentially the monster. But I don't ever think of the wolf in it is like not there was something you said earlier that was like really spoken to me, is like the monster is the unknown. And I think ultimately when we embrace that monster and it becomes in the light and we acknowledge it, we're able to recognize that it's there, it's never going to go away, but it's very possible to live with it. And I think that's a good like metaphor for mental health, because you ask yourself like I don't want to know, and then and it's scary, but also you have definitions, and having definitions and putting yourself in boxes gives you an idea of how to deal with something. So that was ultimately the filmmaking process. We had our in camera and effects, and then we had our post effects, and we're able to I think, emotionally retell what it was like to crack, while starting with static shots and then moving the camera when we needed to mimic the descent into madness.
I don't want to forget about your great cast in the film. You have Zach Villa, who plays Will, Devin Gray as Luke, his boyfriend, and Marlena Forte as Will's mom. Talk about how you ended up casting them, because they were such, obviously an important part, but I mean, this trio right here is the heart of your film.
Yeah, I mean, we were casting in the middle of the pandemic. Like, we were ready to go March 2020, and then all of a sudden everything shut down, and we're like, great, well, who knows when we're going to do this? So, but we started casting because we're like, oh, clearly the pandemic's going to end in May, or clearly the pandemic's going to end in October. Clearly the pandemic's going to end in January. So, and then finally we had vaccines, and we're like, okay, clearly we don't know when this is going to end, but we shot it in June 2021 when we all thought COVID was over. And then all my friends were like, literally like on Instagram stories being like, yes, no mask. And then I got out and I was like, I'm ready to join you guys. And people were like, mask mandate, Delta. And I was like, fuck. But luckily we had no COVID cases on set. And this is not what you asked. But anyway, so basically the long and short of it is we just auditioned. I think there was a beginning moment where we like got obsessed with the idea of like getting names or whatever, and to be fair, I think we did, but in the way that was like, the read the script, the actor takes like months to read the script, and then ultimately we're like, you know what, let's just audition and see what we get, because I think we might get some pretty great diamonds in the rough. And then Zach was the first person cast, and he was also the last tape I saw, and I was just like floored. I was like, oh my god, this person gets this. And then he spent a year with me, and then was able, you've been talking to me for however long we've been talking, and you can kind of get a sense of Zach playing me, but combining him and me, like, wearing my skin suit, but in a way that really feels honest, because he went to Juilliard. Have you heard of that? And so he's like really, he's really, I don't know, just really methodical in the way he works. And so he was the first person on, and then we just started building our team as it were. And Dubek, who plays the dad, like blew me away. It was the first person where I was like, oh, you get that the dad's funny. Everybody was trying to play him as a butthole, and I'm like, I don't view my dad that way. I just think he's sardonic in his humor. So like when he came, I was just like, yes. And then Marlene, when she taped, and she's worked with like Ryan Johnson, she's worked with J.J. Abrams, like she's like, worked with a lot of people. When I saw her, and I she founded The Labyrinth, with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and she came and auditioned on Sour Tape, and she made every wrong choice, but they were so bold, and I could put them in any other part of the movie. That I met with her, and she's the only one I met with. I was like, Marlene, I'm in Infuriate, and she's like, let's make a movie. And Devin came to us and also taped, but I would do this, because we were in the middle of pandemic, and I was like, I don't want to do Zoom callbacks because I don't know if I could tell. I'd rather just talk to them. So I met with each actor for like an hour to 2 hours, depending on how much we vibed. And that's how I picked them. And I'm from theater. Like, acting is so important to me. And as a person who, that's what I understood going into the filmmaking process most of all because of that. So, me and my casting director were like, we want really good actors. And then once we got our core five, as it were, Maddie Zima got on board. And then, all the doctors kind of filled out our final thing as favors, but they were all good actors, and I knew who they were. So I'm really proud of that part of the movie making and filmmaking specifically. So thanks for calling that out.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic. And I mean, the scene with, I don't want to give anything away, but there's a scene with Will and Luke towards the finale of the film. And,
that part. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a lot of trust that goes on when you're doing a scene like that. I mean, talk about like the trust between a director and an actor when the actor knows going into it, okay, I'm gonna have to do X, Y, and Z. And but as far as what kind of prep was done, because I have to say that whole sequence was so well done, because you don't know what's real, what's not, what's happening, what's not.
Right.
But when we're talking about that scene, how did you guys approach it?
Yeah. So, I mean, without ruining anything, there's just like a pretty, what he's talking about is a pretty intimate scene. So sex scene that gets And we dealt with that very, I would say, I want to say professionally is the right word. We had an intimacy coordinator, and we also had a stunt coordinator on that day. And that was the day there were moments of physical violence, sexual violence, blood, and gore, all in this 14-hour day in which we were in a tiny studio apartment. And so it was a wild day. But basically what happens in terms of the intimacy scene, we had an intimacy coordinator, and it was honestly like, people were like, "Oh, this person's here to police, make sure everybody's safe." I'm like, "Yeah, that's one part of their job, but also their other part of their job is to form the narrative with you." And that was like, and weirdly enough, my friend Carly, who I went to high school with, does this professionally. So asked her to get involved, and we got to, and she met with me first, and I talked to her about what I wanted, and and she was like, "Okay, cool." Then she went to Devin and Zach, and they were like, and she was like, "This is what Addison wants." They told me what they were comfortable with, and then Carly talked to me about what they were willing to do. And so we all typed it up in this all big document of being like, this is how it's, not like he puts his hand here, he touches his butt here. More just like, these are my boundaries, and this is what I won't cross, and then this is what I'm able to do. And then we were able to like live in that thing. And when things got, if people were uncomfortable, we already created this safe space for them to vocally talk about it. I think there was one point in one scene in which one of our actors was like, "I don't know if this is the right way to do this scene." And I was like, "You know what? You're right. I'm not going to use this. Let's just move on from this scene and go to a different cut." And it was like so easy. It was just like, we already had that trust with each other. Yeah. And they were just, and it also felt a little, not mechanical in the way, but it felt very professional. Like, the ropes would come on, we would talk about the scene, the ropes would come off, we would do the scene, and it got emotionally charged in the way that, again, we were all safe because, as it were, we had like a safety word in that sense, because we all kind of had the structure and the foundation of what we knew we were dealing with.
Sure.
And so, so that's how that like kind of came together.
Yeah, it felt very fluid because as the scene is progressing, you're kind of like, "Oh, okay, where's the cut going to come in here?" And then it's like, "Oh, there's no cut coming in here. This is we're staying on this." And it's like, "Oh, yeah, we're really staying on this." And but it felt natural, and it didn't feel forced. It felt very fluid. Right. It worked because of the way, not only how everybody did it, but also as well in the story and the film itself. It all felt cohesive.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I don't want to do a sex scene just to do a sex scene. I think ultimately, narratively, it fit. And also, part of me really wanted to show the authenticity of what it's like to have gay sex, because we have so little of that in actual cinema, especially in horror, So there's like so many versions of it where you're just like, I get it, because the sex scene is not necessarily important to the story. Like, we don't need to show like all the processes of how we get to the end result. But I think, for me, like, while I had no one looking over me and policing me, being like, "You can't do this, it's not going to sell," I'll be like, "Well, let me do this once, and maybe I won't get to do it again." But I got the opportunity, and I wanted to explore it because I think it was necessary to the story, and I'm glad everybody was on board.
Well, hats off to you and everyone involved in the film. It's a great movie. If anybody out there wants to follow you or the film on social media, where can they go?
They can go to AddieBear5 with a Y, AddYBEAR5. I'm on Twitter, but it's just a doom scroll, so I don't think I'm a good follow. But Instagram, you can follow it. Follow the movie on at hypochondriac.film. And those are the two places that you can find us.
And Hypochondriac is available in theaters right now, and it's going to be on demand and on digital starting August 4th. Addison, thank you so much for joining me here in the Graveyard Show. This was a fantastic interview, and I'm really thrilled to have you on, and would love to have you back on for your next film.
Yes. Hopefully I make another one, The Caretaker. I need to now. This was so fun. Should I say The Caretaker a little differently? You'd be like, The Caretaker.
And as I put this interview to rest, I really want to thank Addison for joining me here on the show. As I told him when we were done, this interview went down a road I was not expecting, but I thought it was important to talk about mental health. And since Addison was so generous about being open about his experience, I thought it'd be just good for all of us to hear his experience with it and how others can help if they have family or friends currently dealing with mental illness. So I hope all of you out there enjoyed this, and I can't recommend Hypochondriac enough. It's a really, really well done film, and Addison's quite a talent. He really is. this film is a very solid film. And again, it is available now in theaters, and you can check it out on demand and on digital starting August 4th. By the way, there's a little bit more to the interview that I'm saving for my end-of-year show because we talk about the film's ending, and obviously I don't want to give it away since the movie's just coming out. So on my Voices from the Grave show in December, I have some good outtakes of this interview that I'll be playing on there, and it's going to be Addison and I discussing the ending of the movie as well as working with his director of photography, Dustin Supinchak. Dustin, by the way, one of the projects he worked on was Scare Package. He shot the cold open to that film, just to give you a little bit of reference there. And as I begin to close down the graveyard, I would like to invite you to join me in my Catacombs of Horror, which is available on YouTube. Catacombs of Horror. It's my video production that I do. There are 3 videos currently up right now. The first one is about 1980s horror and what best represents 1980s horror. The second one is the very popular favorite scenes from Count Yorga Vampire. I've been getting some great comments on there from people. So it's nice. It's nice to have an interaction with listeners, even if they're not even listeners of the show. They found the video and they've been commenting on it. Actually, somebody pointed out I said the car was a VW wagon when it was a VW bus, and I'm like, I can't believe that I said that. But yeah, so I pinned that at the top. So any of you out there who are looking to correct me, it's already there. And the third one is my thoughts on Halloween 4, the missed opportunity of the Halloween series, and why I think outside the original, that is the most important film in the series. Catacombs of Horror, available on YouTube. And of course, you can find the Graveyard Show podcast on YouTube as well. I've uploaded a bunch of stuff, and if you only listen to the podcast, I highly suggest that you subscribe to the Graveyard Show podcast on YouTube, because I upload new videos just for YouTube. So I've uploaded old promos of the Graveyard Show podcast, as well as old promos from podcasts back in 2009 and 10. You can find those on there, as well as some appearances that I did on podcasts back in 2009 and 10, one of which was with my fill-in host, The Undertaker. So check it out. I also have plans on doing new videos for that as well. I'm putting a plan together to upload some different stuff just to kind of keep the YouTube channel fresh. Once I do that, I will let you know as well. But you should subscribe to the Graveyard Show podcast YouTube channel, even if you listen to it just as a podcast, so you don't miss all this new fun and groovy stuff. All right. The Graveyard Show podcast is also available everywhere podcasts exist. And of course, if you know anyone who is a fan of horror, please invite them to join me here inside the graveyard. New listeners and friends are always welcome. Now, my next podcast is going to be a quick turnaround, because I'm going to be talking about the new film Allegoria. And Allegoria is going to be available on demand and on Shudder starting August 2nd. Joining me for that podcast is going to be the writer-director of the film, Spider-One. You may know him from Power Man 5000. And also the star of the movie, Chrissy Fox, who, well, you may know her as the front woman of Knee High Fox. They will be joining me here in just a few days to talk about their new film, Allegoria, which will be available on Shudder and on demand starting August 2nd. So it's going to be a quick turnaround of shows, something that's very rare here on the Graveyard Show podcast. Sometimes I go weeks between shows, but this one's going to be a tight turnaround. So just be ready to join me here very, very soon. And as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Until next time.